and we'll get started. All right, y'all, we have a couple of different objectives for our time together this morning. So first, we're just going to engage with an overview of the constructed response that's on the new 186 Special Education Specialist exam. We'll take a look at the charge, so what candidates are actually asked to do on their CRI. We'll take a look at the exhibits that candidates are provided as part of their CRI. We'll also take a look at the scoring rubric for the constructed response item and kind of take a look at that. And then the bulk of our time together this morning will be working in those collaborative groups to review the sample responses, trying to determine some qualities and characteristics of what makes a strong candidate response on the 186 exam. And then again, just a reminder, our session today, particularly when we move into those small group spaces, is highly interactive. So this is not a sit and get this morning. This is working in small groups together to sort of pick apart those sample responses and really engage with them this morning. So we do offer some sessions that are sit and gets. This is not one of them. So hopefully you're in a place where you are ready to engage, camera on, ready to work with your small groups when we transition to that part of our morning. In terms of how we'll spend our time, so we have 2 hours scheduled for this morning. So in just a moment, we'll begin with some general information about the CRI. Again, we'll take a look at the CRI charge, all the different exhibits. We'll take a look at the performance characteristics regarding the CRI and that scoring rubric. And then we'll spend just about 5 minutes going over the logistics for our small group work. And then the bulk of that time, you can see highlighted in yellow, is spent in those small group spaces. So we'll spend just over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes, moving in and out of small group spaces, working together in those small group sessions. And then in our last 15 minutes, we'll kind of close out with some reminders, and then we'll also provide some protected time for you all to complete the feedback survey before you head out this morning. All right, your participants guide for this morning, again, is your one-stop shop. So this has everything you need. The materials that you'll need for this morning are in that top row where it says session materials. So you have a link to the preparation manual where those sample responses can be found. You also have a link to the Padlet that we'll use for our small group work. So that's there for you. And then you can see the link to the feedback survey. Underneath that, you do have a row that's additional materials. These are just helpful links that we thought you might like on your participants guide and other resources related to the exam development and launch. So you have a link to the framework, you have a link to the one pager, and then some other 186 sessions that we've hosted over the past year or so. Those recordings are linked for you as well. So you don't need to do anything with those this morning, but they are there if those are helpful to have. And then you have our agenda, our objectives, and some note catching spaces as well on the bottom of that document. We are also using a Padlet this morning when we transition to our small group work. So if you are new to Padlet like I almost am, orienting you to how we'll engage with this. So as we go out into our small group work, you guys will be looking at different sample responses for the 186 exam. You'll document your feedback on the Padlet just by clicking that plus sign that's there. So whatever column you're looking to leave a response in, you can click that plus sign and it'll populate there. We have 2 columns specifically for our small group work, but then I also added a general feedback and questions column. So as we're reviewing any of the information this morning, if you have questions, please do. You can click that plus button there as well. You can document those on your Padlet or your feedback survey so that we can get back to you and get you whatever it is that you need. All right, so we are going to transition now into some general information about the 186 exam. So wanted to just kind of quickly orient us to some background information, some of the general information before we take a look at the CRI. So in terms of structure, as we're looking at transitioning from the older 161 exam to the new 186 Special Education Specialist exam, that 161 exam, candidates had a 5-hour seat time for that test where they were engaging with 100 different multiple choice questions. As we're now moving to 186, candidates continue to have a 5-hour seat time for their test. So no change here. And in that 5 hours, candidates are going to answer 90 multiple choice questions, and those include cluster items. So those like interrelated multiple choice questions. And then in that 5 hours as well, candidates are completing one constructed response. So very similar seat time for candidates, very similar structure with the addition of one CRI and slightly fewer multiple choice questions on the 186 exam. At a glance, that 161 special education EC-12 framework was made up of 4 domains and 12 competencies. As we're looking at the new 186 special education specialist framework, that is made up of 5 domains and 10 competencies. If you were with us in the fall for one of our framework overview or an application process webinars, we took a really close look at those frameworks, and we reviewed sort of not only how some sets of knowledge and skills that candidates need to have are assessed within that exam and how they've been reorganized, but we also spent some time discussing where new sets of knowledge and skills are present on the exam, how they show up in those competencies and descriptive statements. Quick plug here, if you did not have a chance to attend one of our fall webinars or view the recording yet, that recording again is linked for you on your participants guide. So highly recommend taking a look at the framework overview webinar from the fall if you have not yet had a chance to do so. The 186 exam, again, still reviewing the framework. These are the 5 domains that make up the new exam frameworks. We have domain 1, legal and ethical guidelines and knowledge of learners. Domain 2, assessment and program planning. Domain 3, curricular knowledge and instructional practices. And then that 4th domain is professional collaboration, learning and responsibilities. And then my animation went ahead of me, but that analysis and response, domain 5, this is where you see the CRI on the exam. So this is where candidates are actually demonstrating their knowledge and skills on the 186 exam. All right, so some general information about the exam, and now we're going to transition to our constructed response. So again, the special education specialist exam, the new 186, has 5 domains. And on this slide, you can see the approximate percentage of the exam that each of these domains makes up. So you can see domain 3, curricular knowledge and instructional practices, has the highest percentage on the exam, making up approximately 27% of what candidates will engage with. For our purposes today, again on the CRI, we are focusing on the 5th domain, analysis and response, which makes up approximately 20% of the exam. All right, so again, candidates in that 5-hour seat time, they're answering 90 multiple choice questions and completing one constructed response. So each candidate just sees one constructed response on their exam. And then although candidates are going to receive information on their CRI about a different sample student, each candidate has the same CRI charge. So candidates are asked to identify an area of strength and an area of need for a sample student. They're also asked to propose an accommodation, an instructional strategy, an approach that would promote the student's access. Then candidates also need to explain why their proposed accommodation, instructional strategy, or approach would be effective for that student. And then finally, candidates also need to describe a progress monitoring strategy for their recommended approach. So candidates need to address all of these components in their constructed response in a response of approximately 400 to 600 words. So before we continue on, we're just going to push pause here for a few minutes of some independent reflection. So taking a look at this prompt, we're going to take about 3 minutes, reflect on the prompt, and then in that preparation manual that's linked for you in your participants guide, skim those exhibits that are provided to the candidate within their sample CRI. In those 3 minutes, as you're reviewing, maybe drop a couple notes in the chat on your initial thoughts around what candidates need to know in order to be able to respond to the assignment, as well as what do you think candidates need to understand within the exhibits as they're preparing for their constructive response. So we'll take about 3 minutes. Take a look at the prompt that's there on the screen for you. It's also in your participants guide in the preparation manual. And then any initial thoughts you're having around what candidates need to know in order to be able to respond to the assignment, as well as maybe what candidates need to understand within the exhibits. So it's 9:17. We'll come back at 9:20 to review some thoughts that y'all are putting in the chat. All right, y'all. I know 3 minutes moves kind of fast. Any thoughts on what candidates need to understand? There we go. Yeah, so I'm seeing in the chat, candidates first need to be understand exactly what the CRI is asking them to do. So absolutely. And then they need that toolkit of strategies that they can pull from to apply to their sample students. So absolutely agree with that response, 100%. And then they also need to be able to, I'm seeing Jessica put skim for concerns that need accommodation, as well as strength. So I think that's an important thing to call out in terms of the CRI exhibit as well. The charge does ask candidates to identify an area of strength for the student as well. And so that is part of a complete candidate response. And then, yeah, a lot of responses around data. So the candidate's going to be provided with a number of exhibits, they need to understand what that data is telling them in order to generate their recommendation and that progress monitoring strategy. Absolutely. Yep. And then candidates need to understand that assignment expectation. So when they get into their CRI, they need to understand how they're going to respond to each part of that charge. Yeah. And then generally, types of accommodations and instructional strategies, again, that toolkit that they can pull from to apply to their sample student. 100%. All right, so now we're going to take a look at those different exhibits and start to think about what candidates will see within the exhibits and what they're going to be able to do with that information. So some of this was named in the chat, but the candidates are provided 5 different exhibits. So exhibit 1 provides them with a student profile. So obviously within the structure of an exam, we can't provide them with sort of an entire IEP, but these provided components are really to sort of build out who the sample student is, what their needs are, the skills that that student is currently working on, and then how their eligibility area or areas is impacting their learning in the classroom within a specific lesson. So that student profile, candidates are provided with an actual student name, a grade level, an age, background information, their present level statements, any relevant educational history, what the ARD committee has determined around LRE, and then they're also provided the areas of interest and strength for the student. So within that first exhibit, that student profile, candidates need to understand the student's eligibility area. They need to be able to evaluate the impact of their students' eligibility area or areas on their learning, their executive functioning, their social skills, etc. They also need to be able to review the ARD committee decisions around LRE and sort of place that in context for the student. They need to be also within that first exhibit able to think through how the student's areas of interest and strength can be leveraged in their recommendation of a strategy or an intervention. As we look at that second exhibit, the student's IEP goals and their progress, this is pretty straightforward. So they get a snapshot of the student's current IEP goals. They're able to see the student's baseline, mid-year, and current progress on those goals. And then they are also provided a snapshot of the student's current accommodations. So they're able to think about within that second response, understanding the student's current areas of need that are addressed in their IEP goals first and foremost. They also, within that second exhibit, need to be able to evaluate the student's progress on those goals. So looking at that baseline, mid-year, current progress, make a determination about what is working for the student. Then they also do need to be able to review those current accommodations, sort of see what's in place for the student, think about what the student is already receiving, and then make that recommendation for an additional intervention, accommodation strategy, or support. The third exhibit is the student assessment. So here the candidate's going to engage with a variety of student assessment data. So they may see some sort of inventory data, they may see the student STAR data. It will vary depending on the CRI, but the candidate will also in that third exhibit be provided some context to help the candidate understand the data. So if they're engaging with an inventory, they'll be able to see the descriptive category information. If they're given STAR data, there will be context there to help the candidate sort of place that information in context for the student. So in that third exhibit here, candidates really need to be able to make connections between the student's assessment data, their IEP progress, their areas of eligibility, and their strengths and their needs. When we transition to looking at the fourth and fifth exhibits, here's where the candidate's focus kind of shifts from the student to the classroom context. So what's actually happening in the classroom for this student. So that fourth exhibit is the learning objective, success criteria, and student assignment. Here is where candidates are dropped into the classroom. So they're given the context for the lesson, they're given a specific TEK, then they're given an objective for that lesson that the teacher is engaging with. They're provided success criteria, And then the candidate is also provided a student-facing assignment in that fourth exhibit. So we've provided all of the background information about the student, as much of the IEP as the candidate needs to engage with, and then we move to thinking about the classroom context. That fifth exhibit is the student work sample. So this again could be a variety of different kinds of student work samples, but this is really where that sample student comes to life. So they'll either see a writing sample from their student, they'll see an example of their math calculation, etc. They'll also see a conversation that happens between the teacher and the student about their work sample. In that fifth exhibit, that student work sample, candidates really need to be able to analyze that work sample, see where students are demonstrating mastery, or if they're able to identify where the students' misconceptions are. Again, making those connections between the students' eligibility, their IEP progress, and then what's happening in the classroom. And then by the time they get to the fifth exhibit and they're done reviewing that information, candidates should begin formulating ideas for potential supports or interventions. All right, so that's the charge. That's what candidates need to do. The information they're provided is in the exhibits. So next we'll talk a little bit about what this means in terms of how candidates' responses are scored. Before we go through this information, just wanted to call out the CRI is not a writing test. So they do need to produce something that is scorable, meaning that they have to produce something that the scorer can review. They can't have a blank CRI, but things like conventions, grammar, spelling, etc., are not factoring into the student CRI score. So it is not meant to be a gotcha moment. It is meant to have students or candidates actually demonstrate their learning in a written response and respond to each component of the charge. So in just a minute, we'll take a look at that scoring rubric. We'll talk more about that. But again, candidates are not evaluated on the quality of their writing. They're assessed on those performance characteristics that are on the rubric and the qualities of their response. So in terms of scores, candidates are assigned a score from 1 to 4, with 4 being the highest score a candidate can receive on their CRI. Again, they do need to produce something that is scorable. So candidates can also receive a score of U or B. That would be for an unscorable response or a blank response. But for something that is scorable, candidates are assigned that score 1 through 4. There are 3 performance characteristics that are the basis for how candidates are scored on the CRI. So the first is completion, really thinking about here the degree to which the candidate responded to each individual task in the charge. So did they respond to each of the tasks and each of the bullet points in their response? The second performance characteristic is the candidate's application of the content. So are they producing an accurate response? Are they producing an effective response across those 4 components of the charge? And then finally, that third performance characteristic is support. So is the candidate supporting their response with evidence from the exhibits? Is the candidate supporting their response with examples or explanation? The degree to which they're utilizing what they're provided in those exhibits to craft their response. That's the third performance characteristic of support. As we transition to looking at the actual rubric, you can see there is a performance description tied to each of those 3 characteristics here. Over the next few slides, we'll take a look at them one by one, but wanted to kind of provide this overview here. So you can see completion, application of content, and support. And then there's a descriptive statement for each of the score points 4, 3, 2, and 1 that detail the degree to which the candidate completed their response, applied their content, and provided support here. Also wanted to call out here the performance characteristics in the rubric are part of that preparation manual. So you have that resource and candidates are able to see this before they complete their response. So that is part of the preparation materials. So for a score point of 4, so again, this is the highest response score that a candidate can receive. couple of things to call out here. The 4 response reflects a thorough understanding of the candidate's knowledge and skills. So they are addressing all parts of the assignment. They are providing an accurate, highly effective application of what they understand about special education knowledge and skills. And then they are providing strong, relevant evidence, specific examples, and well-reasoned explanations within their response. So for the 4, what does this actually mean in terms of what a candidate is producing? So a score point of a 4 means the candidate is identifying, again, that area of strength and an area of need for their sample student. A candidate who receives a 4, they're proposing an instructional strategy or an accommodation, an approach for the student that addresses the student's needs and promotes their access within the context of the lesson that they're provided. Again, candidates here are providing a clear, well-reasoned rationale as to why their proposal would be effective with the student, and then they're leveraging accurate, highly effective special education pedagogical knowledge within their response for that 4. Candidates are utilizing data here to support their response across different parts of the assignment, so pulling from those exhibits. And then they also provide a really clear explanation of the progress monitoring strategy. So that's that 4th component of the task for the CRI. So not only are they providing the instructional strategy or intervention, but they also have a really clear plan to monitor the student after providing that instructional strategy or support. As we transition to the 3, you can see the language shifts slightly. So the 3 response reflects that general understanding of special education knowledge and skills. So here the candidate is answering most or all parts of the assignment. Their response is generally accurate, has an effective application of their special education knowledge and skills. And then a 3 response provides sufficient evidence or some examples or generally sound explanations in a 3 response. So here for a 3, this may mean that a candidate fails to identify that area of strength. They may fail to address the progress monitoring strategy, etc. So they may answer all parts of the assignment, or there may be one component of the assignment that they're not addressing in their response that would result in a score of a 3. They do propose that instructional strategy accommodation approach for the student, and they do provide that clear, sort of well-reasoned rationale, again, with an effective application of their special education knowledge and skills. A 3 response you may also see a candidate receive a 3 who utilizes data in one or more parts of their response, but it's not present in multiple components of their CRI. As we transition to the 2, again, the language shifts here. So a 2 response reflects that limited understanding of special education knowledge and skills. So a 2 response may address at least some parts of the assignment, but does not address most or all parts of the assignment. The candidate's providing a partially accurate, partially effective application of their knowledge and skills here, and is also providing limited evidence, limited examples, or limited explanations in their response. So a 2, that could look like the candidate only identifying an area of need, but they fail to address that area of strength and also fail to address that progress monitoring strategy, for example. Their response may apply some special education sort of pedagogical knowledge, but there are misunderstandings present in their response. So it's a partially accurate response. And then again, that performance characteristic, limited evidence, examples, or explanations. So a candidate who receives a score of 2 may have little data throughout the different tasks of their assignment in a 2 response. And then finally, the 1 response reflects little to no understanding of special education knowledge and skills. So they are producing something, but they are addressing few, if any, parts of the assignment within the constructive response item. in the response that they produce, there is largely inaccurate or ineffective application of their special education knowledge and skills. And then here at the 1, the response provides little to no evidence, or if they are provided, the explanations are weak or inappropriately applied in the 1 response. So what would that actually look like? A 1 response could look like the candidate not identifying anything beyond an area of need. So they may identify a need that the student has, but they don't actually in their response recommend that approach, that instructional strategy, or that intervention. Again, if they are responding and providing that area of need or an approach or instructional strategy, the way that they're applying their special education pedagogical knowledge is inaccurate in a 1 response. And then again, little to no use of data across their response. So there's little connection in the candidate's response to the information that's provided to them in those exhibits. So those are each of the 4 score points, how they tie to those performance characteristics, what that might mean in terms of what a candidate is producing. Also wanted to name here, sort of thinking about all of the information that we just reviewed, you may notice there really isn't a formula or a recipe for a strong candidate response. The score points and those performance characteristics really boil down to how completely the candidate is addressing each component of the task, the strength of their recommendation, and then how well they're supporting that recommendation with data and explanations. So in a constructed response item, that completion performance characteristic, how completely are they answering each part of the question? How strongly are they applying their special education pedagogical knowledge? And then where is their support present in their explanations from the exhibits that they're providing? All right, a few other notes on scoring just to name here before we transition, a couple other things to call out. All CRIs for all Texas exams are scored by trained Texas scores with subject matter expertise. So the candidate responses that are being scored on the 186 exam and all of our other Texas exams are scored by humans. They are scored by Texans that are trained in scoring, and they have subject matter expertise. So in this case, special education subject matter expertise. In addition to that, the scorers are using the rubric that we just reviewed in addition to marker responses, which are chosen by committee. So some of you may have participated on some of our test development committees. You may know that there are marker responses, so sort of exemplar responses at each of those score points. Committees of Texas educators, committees of Texas special educators choose those marker responses to say, this is a 4, this is a 3, this is a 2, this is a 1. And scorers are using both the rubric and those marker responses to generate the score. So just wanted to call those things out here because I know we get those questions often, so I want to make sure those are addressed. Human scorers that are Texans, and then using the rubrics and those committee chosen marker responses is how those scorers are scoring candidate responses. All right, y'all, the time has come, and I think maybe I am potentially 2 minutes early, 2 to 3 minutes early, which I can't believe, but the time has come for us to start transitioning to our work session. So the CRI deep dive, we've completed that. That recording will be available, and now we're going to transition into our small group work. So I wanted to start here just naming the sort of overall vision for this time, the goals for our session. The vision for this next hour and 15 minutes or so is really to provide you all with some protected time to review and discuss and analyze these sample responses. So the goal here is that you're leaving with a clearer understanding of the constructed response item, the assignment, and the expectations that candidates have as they're completing that CRI. Also, always love to provide that protected space for y'all to leverage your expertise and your experience in the room. We're a pretty good sized group. So the goal here is just to create this container for you all to connect around the CRIs ahead of the exam launching here in just about 2 months. So our goals for this time, just to work in those collaborative groups, to review the sample responses, again, trying to look for the qualities and characteristics of what make a strong candidate response on the 186 exam. And then again, hopefully providing that foundational understanding of how you can then go and begin supporting candidates as they address the CRI on their 186 exam. Also wanted to name here, this is the second offering of the CRI deep dive and work session, but this is the first time our team has actually provided this structure of capacity building for any new or redesigned exam, at least in the time that I've been at the agency. So really excited to create this space for y'all, facilitate hopefully some really fruitful and thought-provoking conversations as we approach the launch of the exam. So please do, as we start to transition to your work session, ensure that you have that participants guide pulled up as well as your preparation manual. These are kind of your roadmaps for the next hour and 15 minutes or so. So for the next approximately 50 minutes, we're going to move through a series of small group sessions. You are going to review and discuss those sample CRI responses in small groups of 8 to 10, maybe slightly smaller, depending on the size of the group today. We are going to randomly sort you into these working groups, and then you will remain with your group for the duration of the work session. So you'll go out into your small group, and then each time you're back in that space, you'll be back with the same folks. So you'll stay in the same group for the rest of the morning. And then following each of those small group work sessions, we will come back to this main room to debrief and share reflections. So we'll kind of have 4 distinct parts of our small group time this morning. So we will go into that small group session 1. We'll come back to the whole group, share reflections as the larger group. We'll go back out to those same groups for the small group session 2. We'll come back to the whole group to reflect, and we will close out in this whole group space. So we will end the morning all together in the large main room. In the first session, the first time you're out in those small groups, you will be looking at score responses 4 and 3. The second time we go out into those small groups, folks will work together to review the sample 2 response and the sample 1 response. So over the course of this morning, you're getting a chance to review and analyze each of those sample responses at each of the score points that are provided in the preparation manual. Norms for the small group space, again, new offering for the educator standards and testing team. Thought it could be helpful to think about some norms here. These are aligned to our general norms for our session this morning. But those first 2 are new. So really thinking about in your small group space, how you're taking risk with your questions, your wonderings, and your analysis of your sample responses. And then also just wanted to call out in those small group spaces, making sure that you are making space for all the voices in the room, and then also taking the space that you need so you can really maximize the opportunity and have a chance to discuss with everyone. So take 5 or 10 seconds, review these, think if there's any norms that feel particularly important for you in the small group space. All right. So in terms of logistics, so we are a pretty good sized group this morning, but it does mean, there's more of you than there are of us. So a couple of notes on how we're going to show up in these spaces. If you need help in your small group, please do use that raise hand or I need help feature so that a staff member can come pop into your room and get you sorted out. So we're happy to respond to technical questions, any technical issues. If you can't make it into the right room, issues with navigations, etc. If your group is stuck and needs some support, please do utilize that raise hand feature so that we can get you sorted out. Staff are going to wait approximately 5 to 8 minutes before we start circulating into your small groups to listen in, just to give y'all time to get settled, do your introductions, decide on your roles, and begin your conversation. So we will start circulating after about 5 to 8 minutes. Just to listen in, you'll probably see us pop in, mics off, cameras off, but we're going to give you guys a few minutes at the beginning to get settled. And then as questions are coming up related to the exam, anything else that's coming up in your room, if you have a question that doesn't require sort of immediate support in the space, Please utilize the chat for your question or document it on your feedback survey or Padlet. So there's a couple different ways you can get your question documented so we can get you a response. Feel free to use the chat. You can leave those questions that you have on that feedback survey again, or in that column for general questions and feedback on your Padlet. You have a couple different options there. So I lied, I'm overtime. So we're gonna make some adjustments, but it's gonna be okay. So our logistics for our morning. So you'll spend about 20 minutes in each of your small group sessions, and then we'll return to the main space for whole group share out. So you can see here, we'll break out in just a moment. I'll get you there, I promise. I was talking slowly, I guess. We'll get you to your small group spaces. You'll begin discussing about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll spend about 10 minutes in the whole group sharing reflections before we send you back out to your groups. One note, some feedback that we received on our first option. As you are breaking out into your small group, please do make note of your room number. That is going to be your group number for purposes of our whole group response. So as you are clicking join breakout room, please make a note. There's a space for you on your participants guide just to jot down whatever room number you are in. That will be your group number for the purposes of our whole group reflections. Also could be helpful if you get kicked out for any reason or need to rejoin. We know where to put you if we need to get you back in a small group room. All right. So in, again, that first session, we're going to take a look at the sample 4 response and the sample 3. So you saw these guiding questions as part of your preparation work. They are also on your participants guide, but they're here for you as well. In your small groups, you'll be discussing your first impressions of those 2 sample responses, any differences that you're seeing between the 4 and the 3, and then analyzing between a 4 and a 3, what does it look like? What has a candidate done in terms of how they're responding to each task of the assignment? What differences do you see around how they're applying and explaining their special education knowledge? What do you notice about the use of data in the candidate's responses at a 4 and a 3? And then what does the sample response 4 and 3 really tell you about what that candidate can know and what they can do, or what they know and what they can do? If you have additional time, there is an extension question there. So maybe thinking about what insight a 4 or a 3 provide into the candidate's preparation. But those original guiding questions are the focus of your time in those small group spaces. We also have a recommended agenda for how you'll spend your time. So spend just a few minutes introducing yourselves, saying good morning. Please do make sure that you identify who in your group is the note taker. So who's documenting your group's reflections on the Padlet, who's keeping track of time. And then please do make sure that you identify a spokesperson who will speak for your group when we come back to the whole group reflection space. So make sure that you identify who's going to come off mute and share your group's reflections here. All right. Again, on your participants guide, you do have the agenda here for you. So I know that was in the slide, but you have it for your reference here, sort of recommended time. So do spend, maybe after you introduce yourself and identify those roles, 2 to 3 minutes sort of refreshing your review of the sample response 4 and 3, just to spend just a few minutes doing that independent review, and then the bulk of your time will be your group reflection and discussion. And then make sure you save about 2 minutes at the end there to get those thoughts down on the Padlet before we come back to the whole group space. You have a space to put your group number, and then you also have a note catcher there for your own independent notes as you talk with your group. All right. In just a moment, we are going to send you out to your breakout spaces. I think tomorrow we can set them for, did you do 25 minutes? 20 minutes? Perfect. All right. You should have seen your rooms open up. Make a note of your small group. We're going to give you about 5 to 8 minutes to get settled, identify your roles, do your independent review, and then we will see you back here shortly. And then again, y'all, your group number is the room number of your breakout room. So as you're clicking join, you should see room X, room 1, room 2, room 3. That is your group number.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay. They're actually set to 30 minutes, but we can just end them at 25. And then we can support with telling them what group number they are if we need
Yeah.
to as well.
Yeah, I'll broadcast to give them some updates. So let me think. It's 9:50. We have until 11. So if we do, I'm not as far behind as I think, right? Okay. My agenda's a little off. Folks in the main group, Priscilla, Candace, Dr. Hines, do y'all need help getting to your small group space? All right, I'm gonna move y'all where you need to go. Is there a way, DeMarco or anyone, do y'all know to move them to the small group room if they don't join? I
I
think you can.
think,
You can submit, but I think they have to accept it for go.
yeah, if they have to, if they, because I didn't move them manually, they have to